Gentlemen, take your seats. A case study in the art of wordless communication. By Analyze. Game of Thrones used to have some great scenes. I know, it's hard to believe, but once upon a time, before it was the stereotypical high fantasy disaster fest it became, there was a golden age, where season after season, you would find it stuffed full of great scenes. Episode after episode, it would cover you with a fountain of wisdom, and keep you coming back with its penetrating wit, all while seemingly building up to an incredible climax. In other words, it was a show nobody would ever think of pulling out of until the very end. So in sad remembrance of this era, may its good writing rest in peace, I recently took a look at one of the incredible scenes from the earlier seasons in my cleverly titled article, A Lion Still Has Claws, deconstructing the best scene in Game of Thrones. Afterwards I thought, what other way can I pad my content? Explore these wonderful earlier scenes. And as if sent by the seven who be in that heaven themselves, or a mild migraine, a thought occurred to me. Why not analyze the scene where they played a game of musical chairs during a small council meeting? And I thought, what an absolutely retarded idea. But I'm flat out of good ideas, so here I am to break down the scene and tell you what makes it such a wonderful microcosm for the characters and, most importantly, how it is a perfect example of the art of wordless communication. And yes, I am aware I'm not the first person to delve into this topic, as the video's comment section may tell you, but I'm going to do it bigger, better, in so much more detail, and with so many more veiled sexual references that you'll forget all about those plebeians. First, allow your friendly narrator to pull out his candles and set the scene. Like all great scenes, it starts with a shot of the living embodiment of badassery that is Tywin, who's standing next to his chair as Varys, Pycelle, and Littlefinger all enter. Tyrion, in his usual manner, arrives just a bit late and with a smirk on his face. Tywin sits down and stares at them, no doubt undressing Varys with his eyes. Varys moves to sit, but there comes Littlefinger to his right. He moves like a bobcat, he dodges, and he manages it first. Pycelle waddles behind them, as is his custom. Cersei enters, carefully takes one of the chairs, and sits next to her father. Finally, Tyrion noisily grabs a chair and moves it to the opposite part of the table, and then sits down. Then he makes a joke, and the rest of the scene, the talky bits we won't bother with, begins. Alright, you still awake? You haven't gone to snooze after reading a solid paragraph about people moving or sitting on chairs? You haven't started checking Twitter? Don't pretend, I see everything. Yes, that too. Your mother should be very ashamed of herself for birthing you. But alright, I'll admit that, once again, the scene doesn't exactly seem like it's groundbreaking. I wrote a scene about musical chairs when I was in 4th grade, and I had at least twice the amount of chairs. Where are the dragons? Where are the glorious rolling mountains we call Amelia's tits? Where are all the things that make an Emmy-winning scene Emmy-winning? Well, hold on to your hat, Space Cowboy, because the impressive part is that rarest Pokemon to be found in Season 8, Mr. Subtext. Let's start where all starts start, at the start of the scene. The first thing we see is the old lion standing there beside his chair and then sitting down. Tywin has always been the boss, not in small part due to Charles Dance's performance, and that is illustrated in this moment. Tywin chooses to take the seat at the head of the table. Not the rear, not the back, but the head. The use of the word head in regards to the table, as you may be well aware, if you've ever read anything at all, not so accidentally also applies to concepts such as the head of the household. That is because the head of a table is generally recognized as an honorary position, and so by sitting at the head, Tywin emphasizes his leading role. By positioning himself in physical space as superior, he also positions himself in psychological space as superior. The clever twat. But there's more. When I'm writing about it, there's always more. Tywin takes the initiative in sitting down, and this signals to everyone else that they should sit too, that they must follow his lead, which, like his seated position, signals both to them and the audience that he is the one who leads here, this time through practice. As the right to initiative is generally in the hands of the person with the highest social status, we ascribe the highest social status to Tywin here. Like the good peons they are, they all naturally move to obey. But as the perfumed Eggman prepares to move in and take a seat, in one swift motion Littlefinger maneuvers past him and takes the seat first, leaving Varys behind him glowering. Firstly, and most obviously, this parallels their relationship. They are in constant competition for power and the favor of powerful people. After all, they spend most of Season 1 fighting over Ned Stark's affections. In this case, Tywin is the powerful person, and physical proximity to him, the closest chair, is a symbolic stand-in for the proximity to power in general. File this away in your adorable little noggins, if you can, as this will later come up again, and again, and again. But this sequence of events also illustrates their respective personalities. On the one hand, we see Littlefinger's slyness. He outmaneuvers Varys here by acting quickly and confidently. We see this in his personality throughout the rest of the series as well, most prominently perhaps when he betrays Ned, acting at just the right time and with no doubt or any noticeable hint of scruples, thereby placing himself in favor of the Lannisters and moving on up, closer to power. Some people are just made for Congress. Varys, on the other hand, is a little bit more cautious. He lets Littlefinger have this one and then calmly proceeds to take the second closest seat. This mirrors how Varys likes to play the long game, waiting for the right opportunity to strike rather than making reckless moves. The man is patient if nothing else. He waits almost 20 years for Daenerys to become an adult and mosey her ass on over to Westeros before finally helping her overthrow Robert's brood. And during Tyrion's trial, he doesn't defend him. He takes the cautious route and sets him free in secret. It's just too bad for him Tyrion didn't share his caution, because as a result, he had to leave his entire life in King's Landing behind. Then again, he did get to make a fun midnight boat trip, so I guess it all evens out. Then, we have Pycelle. By the gods, Pycelle. He, being the old fart he is, slowly shambles over towards the third chair, managing, by some miracle, not to cough up a lung and slip on it before getting there. On the surface, what this shows is that he can't keep up with the schemers around him. He's just an old, senile man, completely out of his prime. He cannot get close to power, and he is simply outmaneuvered. But, if you're familiar with the Game of Thrones deleted content, and if you'll remember the kung fu smack he gave the little birds that tried to stab him, you'll know this is nothing but a mask. In reality, he's quite spry for his age. He probably could have easily tried to take the seat next to Tywin, whom he has a bit of a doughy-eyed man-crush on. Yet, he doesn't do this. He keeps on the mask and waddles, like he's afraid to pull a muscle if he moves more than one at a time, to the third seat. Because it is more important to him that he keeps his cover, that he's an old, senile man who people are bound to underestimate, than to win an insignificant symbolic advantage. As he himself says rather long-windedly, "So many flowers, my lord, each wanting to grow the tallest, bloom the brightest, and one by one, sooner or later, they all get plucked. I don't want to be the tallest or the brightest. I only want to remain in the garden." When Cersei enters, she looks over the room imperiously, only just barely managing to suppress her incessant need to yell, "I'm better than all of you," at the top of her lungs, as she is contractually obligated to do hourly. The obvious thing to do, of course, would be simply to take one of the remaining seats. But this is Cersei blow up the Vatican Lannister, so having never been one to take the sane course, she does not do so. Instead, she takes one of the remaining seats in her hands, lifts it up, and goes to sit at her daddy Tywin's side. This signals very clearly that Cersei will not be less than anyone. She will not let herself be pushed to a lower position, as sitting further from Tywin, who represents power, implies, by anyone. Something which is more than obvious in her later conflict with Margaery and the Tyrells, where almost every single action she does and every word she speaks exudes this desire. But perhaps most prominently, and most stupidly, her attempt to frame Margaery with a faith militant. It also shows us that she's willing to take initiative for this, and, finally, and perhaps most importantly, that she's her daddy's girl. She wants to be at Tywin's side, she wants his approval, and she wants his power, and if you've read the books, you know she identifies with him. She wants to be him, Tywin with teats, but sans intelligence. The last one standing is, of course, our intrepid Tyrion. At this point, the only seat left is the one furthest away from Tywin, furthest away from power. Sitting there would signal very clearly that he's the lowest among them. Not only that, but because Cersei has taken the other chair, there is now even a gap between this final chair and Pycelle's. So if he sits there, Tyrion is not just lower, but there is a significant gap between him and even the person right above him. This situation strongly mirrors Tyrion's life. Due to his dwarfism and his father's dislike for him, this situation strongly mirrors Tyrion's life. Due to his dwarfism and his father's dislike of him, he was seemingly doomed to be relegated to mockery and a life of being distant from power. Yet, how he reacts to these circumstances is also how he reacts to them in the rest of his life. He takes the chair and moves it to the head of the table. He takes his fate into his own hands, refusing to be relegated to the outskirts of power, Just as he took his role as Hand of the King, he takes this wooden bull by the styles. If only the sound editor had thought to add an epic soundtrack to this moment. Not only that, but he moves the chair to the head of the table. This not only gives Tyrion a commanding position himself, as the non-lobotomized among you may remember, the head of the table represents power and leadership, but in doing so he directly challenges his father. He not only claims a seat of equal power, but he sits directly opposite him, a cinematic technique which is often used to show opposition, which, of course, is Tywin and Tyrion's relationship writ small. Tyrion is always ready to challenge his father, one of the few people who is. Just look at all the times he contradicts him, or when he refuses to rape Sansa, or perhaps, most spectacularly, the moment he demands a trial by combat, which, it should be noted, also has him directly facing Tywin, as they are here. And it's not just what he does, but also how he does it. Tyrion doesn't just grab the chair, lift it up, and gingerly move it over there. The little scamp takes it in his hands and then casually drags it over to the head, making an incredibly irritating noise that gets on just about everyone's nerves, especially on Tywin's, who immediately shows his disapproval. So not only does Tyrion enter into direct competition with Tywin by sitting at the head, but he goes out of his way to get on his father's nerves and defy him. Like a puppy pissing on your rug, looking him straight in the eye as he does it, fully aware of what he's just done. Not quite unlike, I don't know, every time he's made jokes that annoy his famously humorless father. And just like that, everything that needs to be known about these characters and their dynamics has been communicated. By using Tywin and his position at the table as a symbol of power, physical proximity to represent the concept of proximity to power, and by choosing very carefully which characters do what in what way, this scene manages to do wordlessly, in less than 2 minutes, what Season 8 could not do with an entire script. If the creators were Michelangelo, this would be their Sistine Chapel, while Season 8 would be the outhouse they painted as kids. If you want to be kept up to date on my exploits, follow us on @AnalyticMadness on Twitter, or like us on Facebook.